Hey, good morning, Grace Fellowship. In honor of Father's Day, I wanted to give a charge to the men in our church. I'm more convinced than ever that you are desperately needed, that our families, our churches, our country, our world need wise, sensible, strong, humble, maturing, Christ like, God pursuing, servant leading men. And I know that sounds like a tall order, but that's actually the description of a man pursuing Jesus. And so I want to encourage each one of you, whether you're old or young, whether you're married or not, whether you have kids or not, I want to encourage you towards that end. Right? Genesis 2:15 tells us that men are designed, we're built to work and to keep. We are designed by God to make a mark, to have an influence on our families and on the world around us. And in fact, and we would have an influence for God's glory and not our own. And I would argue that you're already having an influence, whether you realize it or not. You're already influencing your wife and your children and your friends. And so the question is, what kind of mark are you making? What kind of influence are you having? And as we talk about this, right, how do we become the kind of men that I'm describing? So what I want you to do is I want you to envision your life as a series of cascading relationships. Right? I want you to envision a fountain with the water source at the top, and as it fills up that basin, it cascades over down to the next one, and as that one fills, it cascades down. Right? Envision your life as a series of those cascading relationships. And this morning, I just want to charge you very quickly with three of them. The first one, the first love, the first relationship that I want to address is your relationship with God. Right? Love God. This is the primary calling. This is your primary relationship. So love God more than your hobbies, more than your work. It's interesting. I don't have to usually tell most men to avoid playing or working. We run in those directions pretty easily. Right? But love God more than your hobbies, more than your work, more than your children, and yes, more than your wife. Your relationship with God is the core relationship. It is from there that the water flows down to everything else. And so be men of the word, be men of prayer, be men of worship. Lead other men in these things. And these are not feminine things. Right? I would remind you that the same man who killed a giant with a slingshot and led thousands into battle could also play the harp and wrote poetry to God. And that's King David. And so these are masculine things to read and to pray and to worship. So pursue a living relationship with God above everything else, and you will never be dissatisfied. So love God. Secondly, love your wife. Love her sacrificially as Christ loved the church, Ephesians 5:25. I realize that some marriages are difficult, and all marriages have difficult seasons. But your calling, brother, is not simply to tolerate your wife or view her as some inferior being. In fact, 1 Peter 3:7 is pretty clear. Peter tells us to honor our wives because they are co-heirs with us of the grace of life. And so honor your wife, love your wife. Avoid, there are two ditches to avoid here. The one is aggression and the other is passivity. Most of us tend to fall into one or the other in our relationships with our wives. But avoid the ditches of aggression and passivity and instead follow Jesus down the road of life-giving sacrifice. If you're married, love your wife. And then third, lead your children. And you'll notice I didn't say love your children, I said lead your children. The way that you love your children is by leading them. The evidence is monumental, right? The influence of a father in the life of a child is huge, is overwhelming, right? Not only does the Bible teach that, but we have mounds and mounds of research that confirms it. And that doesn't diminish mom's role, right? We love and celebrate good moms. Okay, we are not diminishing mom's role, but dad, you are the main influencer of your home for good and for bad. Your kids are following your lead already. And so the best way for you to lead them is to point them to Jesus. Engage with them on their level. Read the Bible with them. Pray with them. Repent to them when you sin. Point them to Jesus. And the second best way for you to lead your children is to love your wife. Don't neglect your marriage for the sake of your children. They're only in your home for a short time, and that, your relationship with your wife, you will have for the rest of your life, Lord willing. And so as your marriage flourishes, your children will flourish. Remember the cascading fountain, right? It begins with God, the water flows down into your marriage, flows down into your children, and then it flows out from there into your other relationships. Kevin, I feel like a failure in all three of those areas. So do I. And the good news is that Jesus didn't come for men who were crushing it, who were knocking it out of the park, right? He came for needy sinners in desperate need of his grace. So lean on him, run to him, ask for the strength that only he provides. And if any of these things has prompted in you a desire to grow in any of these areas, let's talk. Happy Father's Day. See you soon.